In this topic, we're going to look at SaaS, or Software as a Service, application integration. So once you have your subscription and then you have a portal, we need to take advantage of all the richness that it provides. And one of those things is single sign-on, like we've talked about previously. So if we have either Active Directory on-premises accounts synchronized, or we have ADFS for federation, or we have pure cloud users. Again, we mentioned before that probably most companies won't do that, but a lot of small to medium-sized businesses have a few hundred users, don't want to have an on-premises infrastructure set up. They may just create their users from scratch up there. Why? Because they already have Office 365. Well, now we want to provide access for other applications or SaaS applications. So as an example, my current customer that I've been working with, they're a large government agency, and they have several sub-agencies underneath them. So they have somewhat of a central IT department, and then they have these sub-departments that all report up to them. Each of these sub-agencies have federations with the central IT, and then that central IT has access to Azure, which then has access to these HR applications, right? So it's that federation from the Software as a Service to Azure AD going back to on-premises using ADFS. So it's kind of a combination of all those things that we've briefly touched upon before. But in doing this, there's two basic management tools we're going to use. So we have our standard management portal where we can configure the SaaS applications themselves, and I'll show you we can add them in the gallery, or we can add in custom ones like Kale might develop. Then once we enable that, and we'll kind of go through a four-step process, then the users have a myapps portal that they can see the applications and then access them all. I can grant them access, I can give them group membership to those, so I can say I want one department to get these access to these applications, I can add those users and then they seamlessly get in there through SSO. And they can even modify their profiles from that page as well. So let's take a look at, first of all, in the management portal. So I'm in my Contoso MG, and it's very interesting. So I'm going to show you a little comparison and see if you can see the difference here. So this is just simply the kind of the first step of adding in the SaaS application. So when I click Add at the bottom, and I'll back up here real quick here too, just to show you where I was. So I was in Active Directory, and then from there, these are my Azure Active Directory environment. So I have multiple. So you can actually have more than one Azure Active Directory installed in your subscription. Again, why would I do that? Because I have different departments, different organizations, whatever. So when I come in and add this, so I can say add an application my organization is developing. If I do that, I give it a name, I give it a web application or web API, or I say if it's a native client application, right? And then I can point to it there. If I say, now this one, I'm going to show this one before I go to the middle one. Publish an application that will be accessible from outside your network. Now, if I'd go to one of my other subscriptions or one of my other Azure ADs, you would only see the first two. And the reason why is in this particular Azure Active Directory instance, we actually have Azure Active Directory Premium enabled. And once we do Premium, it lights up another feature, which is known as Azure Active Directory Proxy. So the proxy allows us to proxy this authentication outbound to users so that we can publish this on the public internet and they can then get to it. So in here I give it a name, I give it an internal URL that they're going to access, and then we choose the pre-authentication methods, right? So Azure Active Directory or pass-through. So pass-through would be like for a landing page for a website that we don't want them to authenticate, or we can use Azure Active Directory to authenticate those. Okay, so that's just a brief point about that. But what I really want to focus on here are the applications from the gallery. So there's a lot of richness here, but there's a little subtle difference that I want to point out, and a lot of people don't really catch this. So you'll hear, and this is a good thing, right? We see there's 2,494 applications, SaaS apps already out there. So, and they're all categorized here, so you can search for them. But the thing that's really interesting is at the top here, you see featured applications. So there's only 14. So here's something that you need to understand the difference, right? So it's taking a little while to boot up here. But in the featured applications, you'll see as I click on these, each one is fully enabled for seamless single sign-on experience. And as I click on each one of these, you'll see here, and it will say, and enable single sign-on with Box, and enable single sign-on with Citrix, and enable single sign-on with Concur. But if I come to anything else other than those 14, you will not see single sign-on. You're going, oh my gosh, well that's not good, right? So what you're going to get though, you're going to get kind of a same sign-on experience. So what happens is, if I choose these SaaS applications, I'm going to get, what it's going to do is going to do what's called password vaulting. So you'll put in a password for that. It will vault it, encrypt it inside Azure Active Directory so it's safe and secure. And then whenever you need access to that, Azure AD unlocks that and provides access. So it kind of feels like single sign-on, but it's not true single sign-on in that sense. So that's just something to be aware of. And what happens is later on down the road, just for an awareness perspective, is if that password changes, well, guess what's going to happen? You're going to have to reset that. So if I have an SSO experience with these featured applications, right, that's my ideal perfect world. But we have a lot of applications, but you just got to be aware about if the password changes, you're going to have to modify that. Okay, so that's kind of the putting a SaaS application into the management portal. Now, if we come to the rest of the picture, so let's kind of go through the building blocks. There's 4 main building blocks. So in the first case, we have single sign-on, which we enable. And when I set up the application itself, so I have 3 options here. So I can do Windows Azure AD single sign-on. In this case, we use an example of Salesforce, right? We can do the password single sign-on that we selected. So in this case, Salesforce actually was one of those featured applications, so it did true seamless SSO, but it also gives an option for password single sign-on as well. Or you can do a third option here for existing sign-on, configures Windows Azure AD to support single sign-on using Active Directory Federation and or a third-party single sign-on provider. So maybe you have Azure AD, but we're also using Ping Federate, for example, right? Because that's an option actually for Office 365. So you could light that up as well. So that's the first step, first main building block. In the second one, we look at user provisioning, and this happens once we light this up with the application. So this is where we can automatically provision user accounts from Azure AD to Salesforce or whatever your SaaS application is. So this kind of synchronizes that user account up to that. And as an example, in the current customer I'm working with, where they have an HR time and attendance application, they don't have this. So they have to do a manual process. So when we have user accounts on premises, they actually have to export them out, take them over to the third-party application. But in this case, some applications will do that magic for you, which is really nice.
So Mark, in the past, we had our identity systems like FIM or something like that to be able to kind of synchronize these identities.
Right.
And you're saying that with specific applications like Salesforce, you pointed out here, this user provisioning is actually doing that same function for us?
Well, yeah, the basics of it, exactly. So it helps to kind of remediate that. So it's not doing the full richness that FIM would do, but in this case, as far as the user account being uploaded up there, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So that was the second building block. And then we have the third building block. So this is what we were talking about from the user perspective. So this is what's known as the Access Panel UI. So the user would go to the myapps. Whatever your organizational name is, contosomg.com, and I can access these applications. So in this instance, you see I have a Office 365, I have SharePoint, some internal applications which I can access as well. And then the fourth part we have here, and this is pretty cool. So once you get done with this, and one of the beauties of Azure as a whole across the board is the richness of reporting, the machine learning, and anomalous activity. I think that's a great word. I don't know where that comes from, but anomalous activity. So as an example, if I log in right here in Redmond, and then all of a sudden we see a login from China, 2 minutes later, we know that either I have a really, really fast jet, or maybe I'm logging in, but it's a red flag, right? So it kind of detects these types of things. Signing after multiple failures if you've got a brute force attack or from multiple geographies. So this is great telemetry information that can kind of tell you and warn you about potential threats about people not using these applications properly.
Mark, if you could just go back one slide there, you showed a screenshot there of some applications. It was a little portal. So this would be something like the use case for this would be a company says we want to kind of advertise some applications, and so when a user gets onboarded, he can select, hey, I want this application, and maybe there's some sort of approval. Does it handle all that approval and that kind of stuff too?
So you can do that. So there's a couple ways you can set up. I can either just grant it to you, right? Or I could add you to a group, and that's why you see the groups in there, and then I can approve you in that way as well.
Okay, so it handles that whole workflow.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome.
Yep. Very, very nice. Okay. So that pretty much concludes our topic on SaaS app integration. We have two different portals. First of all, from the management perspective, where you would normally manage Azure Active Directory, and then we have the user portal. Thank you.